there was this great little myth of forgiveness that made this whole reading a little bit easier. It is believed, but no sound evidence to show, that the eye of the needle was a nighttime gate. It was a second gate into Jerusalem for after the large gates were closed. The only way a camel could get through would be by stooping down and taking everything off its back. Well, that's a little bit easier than actually passing through an eye of a needle, and it kind of makes it easier to talk about. But the more you research it, there is no evidence of such a thing. And Jesus said it's easier for a camel to pass through an eye of a needle. That's kind of what he meant. So let's thread this needle. Today's gospel story is one rich in tradition and has been taught and preached and interpreted for centuries. But I believe Jesus meant, if you can, give up everything and follow him. Jesus means for us to be spiritually poor or poor in spirit. Jesus literally means give up everything, and if you can't, well, the Catholic Church invented indulgences for just that reason. And then got corrupted, of course. One commentator says, often the Bible acts as a mirror, throwing back to us reflections of ourselves or of our culture in the characters and the conversations on the page. The questions asked, the attitudes exposed, the priorities that are held seem amazingly modern, especially in this section. Certainly, this is the case with the figure traditionally called the rich young ruler, though Mark does not indicate that he was either young or a ruler. In fact, it doesn't even say he was rich, it just says he has many possessions. If you look at some of those tent cities underneath some of the overpasses, some people who are very poor have many possessions. He could easily be dressed in contemporary garb, represented as a product of a mainline Protestant church. His religious heritage, his prosperity, and his sincerity are admirable qualities. It is interesting to observe the contrast between the noteworthy traits and the little children in the previous story from last week, who come to Jesus as people without rights and recognition. This story has become a story of the poor, and the story has become a story of the rich. This is rarely seen as a story of love, and yet the rich man has to be taken at face value, says one commentator, not made into a proud, self-righteous caricature. In coming, he kneels before Jesus and raises an existential question. When Jesus asks him about the commandments, his answer is, I have kept all these since my youth. It's straightforward. It does not need to be taken as arrogant or presumptuous. In no way does Jesus' treatment of the man challenge or mock his integrity. Jesus looked at him and loved him. Seeing him clear, Jesus does not rebuke or discipline him, but loves him. It is more than an admiration or respect or sentimentality. It's a gut-wrenching concern one has for a loved one, as one about to take their life, and all that is important in a moment is like to get the gun out of his hands and help him discover a reason to live. You lack one thing. This is one more thing you need to do. Go, sell what you own, and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. Wholehearted discipleship cannot take place until the ties to the man's possessions are broken. Ties so intense and so enslaving, he can only hang his head and walk away grieving. It's interesting to me when I look at this line and after reading this reflection, because I always thought Jesus looked down at him and loved him and said, that. I often thought of Jesus as having this kind of love that is said in my head, oh, bless your heart. You actually believe that this is a list of to-dos and that's all there is. Aren't you sweet? Well, in the eyes of this commentator, I stand corrected. This was Jesus' true love and concern for this person who was seeking to go further. I just want to throw this question out there too, as I said before. Why do we always assume he's rich? Maybe he is sad because he feels he has nothing to sell or give. Or at least nothing worth monetary value. One commentator sees it this way. Mark says that Jesus loved him. Something not repeated in Matthew or Luke, where the story is repeated. This is an echo of the greatest commandment of loving God and neighbor. Jesus obeys in his love for the rich man, and yet the rich man cannot give up all his possessions and follow Jesus. He cannot put love of man before love of things. But then I think, why do we assume that he's rich? What if this is about something else? It's easy to take the man's grief and inability to transform his life into something new and generalize it. Did I mention this is about transformation? This isn't always about giving up wealth. This isn't always about practicing the law. This is about practicing change and growth. The young man has a good spiritual start. You know the commandments: do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not lie about someone, honor your parents. Jesus emphasizes this as the guidelines, as the beginning to a good spiritual practice and a good way to live. The young man has done all these, day in and day out. Followed the commandments, lived a good life. Okay, says Jesus. Then I want you to go further. If this practice is down pat, you got all the commandments all lined up and done, then let's do more. We can always do more. We can always go further. Sell everything you own, give the proceeds to the poor, and follow me. But you see, the man finds it too hard to transform, too hard to change that much, so drastically, and he goes away sad. Jesus did not tell him he could not get into heaven. As a matter of fact, if, after Jesus listed the commandments, the man could have walked away happily knowing he was set. He could have just said, oh, okay, thank you. That'll do. I do that. But the man had a beginning of something already happening, for he knew there had to be more. Otherwise, why ask the question? He had to explore his call, where the Spirit might be leading him. He had to ask the question. Yet when he explores the challenge of the Spirit, he is resistant to the finale. Selling everything and following Jesus. That's too much. He went away sad. I wonder, what if Jesus had said, start a practice to minimize your possessions? Because Jesus didn't say you had to do it all at once. Prayerfully and intentionally get down to just what you need. Get rid of all the extra stuff that is holding you back. Not all at once, not all the time. Make it a spiritual practice. Would he have walked away so dejected? Would this have made it easier? Walter Brueggemann reminds us that it is true that in a sermon the man's problem can be generalized and identified as anything that claims our highest loyalty, our ultimate concern, and prevents an uninhibited following of Jesus. Not only wealth, but ambition, education, religion, and the like. But the conversations that follow with the disciples and Peter warn us about meeting the topic of money too quickly, or possessions too quickly. Possessions have a peculiar way and insidious way of becoming our masters, precisely because they hold the potential for good as well as for evil. They easily seduce us and make us their slaves. Thus, money remains a topic of conversation most often. You see, the disciples watched this, and they watched this guy walk away sad and are confused. The lesson is for them. Jesus is rather blunt with them concerning wealth and the kingdom of heaven. The statement, it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for someone to get into heaven, goes against their contemporary Jewish faith. See, the disciples, no doubt, are thinking that riches are a material sign of God's blessing. A notion that is occasionally expressed in Jewish literature and certainly alive and well in Western Christianity. They're thoroughly perplexed by what they hear and ask in exasperation, then who can get into heaven? Who can be saved? Maybe one of God's hardest miracles. Because Jesus looked at them and said, for mortals, for you, for I, for anybody else, it's impossible. But not for God. For God, all things are possible. Jesus kind of turns on his head when he has just told the young man, it is still not enough to sell everything and follow Christ for mortals to get into heaven. It's impossible. But in God, through God, in the gift of grace is the key to the kingdom. But then we must follow and answer the call that God places upon our hearts. One commentator reflects how hard it is for the conservatives, because there is a kind of resistant regularity that keeps us safe. How hard it is for the liberals, who know themselves to have all the right answers and want to cram them down the throats of others. I guess you know where this guy is coming from. How hard it is for the whites or the blacks to move beyond racial wounds to trust when we have learned for so long about hurt and fear and mistrust. How hard it is for the entitled to recognize that others have a fair claim on our abundance. How hard it is in our busyness to take time for what matters. The reading is saying it is hard, even impossible for a mere human to get into heaven, and yet it is not, for with God all things are possible. With God, a conservative's rules and regulations can bend. With God, a liberal can take a loving and humble approach to their brothers and sisters. With God, we can explore white privilege and begin to move beyond racial wounds. With God, those gifted with abundance can seek equity for all. With God, we can slow down and take time for what matters. As he used to, quote, as you know it used to say, for men it is impossible. Now it says, for mortals it is impossible. In our male generosity, the men have now invited the women as well to think about the impossibility. Join us in our misery. For all our resolve and good intention, it is hard. How hard. Hard to let go. Hard to move on. Hard to be transformed. And then Jesus says, because he will not leave them there, for God, all things are possible. Listen to that. It was impossible so long ago for a baby to be born to old Mother Sarah in the book of Genesis. It was impossible for slaves to break out from the demands of the Pharaoh. It was impossible that Jews would come home to a new Jerusalem. It is impossible that a Friday death should be broken open by Easter newness. It's impossible that God's Spirit would blow newness beyond all of our tribal affiliations to create a new community. It was impossible that apartheid in South Africa would end. It was impossible that hate would stop its authority in Northern Ireland. It is impossible that we will ever see a completely just world. It is now impossible to see the end to hunger, war, or disease. The world is full of impossible. Yet, we are a people who hold on to miracles worked by this Easter agent. Alice laughed. There's no use in trying, she said. One can't believe impossible things. I dare say you haven't had much practice, said the Queen. When I was younger, I always did it for a half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Then Peter has to lift his voice. It sounds almost as if he's arguing or defending himself and the others. Look, we left everything and followed you. But many who are first will be last, and the last shall be first. Think of that. There's another impossibility. Last first, first last, dead alive. humiliated, exalted, hungry fed, guilty forgiven, lost found. The word of the gospel is big and strong. We do not need to turn away in shock and grief. God is among us, doing the impossible work of transformation. All things new. How hard? All things new. All things new. Perhaps this transformation in giving up one's riches depends on one's point of view. It would be hard to walk away from everything. Some of us simply couldn't even if we wanted to. We have dependents and work and health and responsibilities. Heck, we have a life to live, and to give up everything just isn't our calling. And yet, giving up riches. Giving up riches was the theme of Monday's Bible study that Chris mentioned. Bob gave a bunch of different quotes from different spiritual people across time. I don't know who he gave what quote to, so I put them in chronological order. A poor man asked the Buddha, "Why am I so poor?" And the Buddha said, "You do not learn to give." So the poor man said, "If I'm not having anything," the Buddha said, "You have a few things. The face, which can give a smile. Mouth, you can praise or comfort others. Heart, it can open up to others. Eyes, you can look the other with the eyes of goodness. A body, which can be used to help others." Such simple gifts, yet it is something that any one of us can give. Your smile just may be another person's treasure for that day. St. Basil said, if each kept only what is required for his current needs and left a surplus for the needy, wealth and poverty would be abolished. The bread you eat belongs to another who is starving. The coat that lies in your chest is stolen from the naked. The shoes that rot in your house are stolen from the man who goes unshod. The money you have laid aside is stolen from the poverty-stricken. In this way, we are all oppressors of as many people as we could help. He says, no, it's not rapaciousness that is condemned, but your refusal to share. Okay, for those wondering what rapaciousness means, it's having or showing a strong, excessive desire to acquire monies and possess things. I must have this, I must have that. I'm not happy unless I'm buying or collecting or hoarding. Not so much intentionally, but made me think, I have a huge drawer filled with t-shirts. Mm-hmm. How many can I wear in a week? And if I went through every one in that drawer, it'd probably be about 3 weeks. How many are actually realistically hold any sentimental value whatsoever? Do I need all those t-shirts? Sure, I can weave them into a rug, but am I really going to do that? Or am I just going to buy t-shirt yarn that somebody already worked on making so I don't have to do it out of my own t-shirts? Just this pause. Then Narrow Buff, a former Franciscan, says, anyone who is poor, who is not poor, may become so through solidarity and more through identification with the poor. One feels full of compassion and gentleness for the inhuman situation that afflicts the poor and decides through love to live together with them, participating in hope and bitterness. This was the way of Jesus. He who was rich became poor for us, with the aim of overcoming the difference between persons, some in affliction and others in consolation, so that there might be equality. We can choose to learn more about what it means to be poor. In different societies, that means different things. If one wanted to in San Francisco, one could walk with the night ministry for an evening or two and just see who they encounter on the streets. A very different and challenging type of ministry. Here in Petaluma, one can volunteer at COTS or perhaps at the senior lunches offered by Petaluma People Services. Roughly 10 to 13% of the people in Petaluma alone live below the poverty level. Who are they? And what can we do to make a difference? Dorothy Day says, the mystery of the poor is this, that they are Jesus, and what you do for them, you do for him. It is the only way we have of knowing and believing in our love. The mystery of poverty is that by sharing in it, making ourselves poor, and giving to others, we increase our knowledge of and belief in love. Making ourselves poor and giving to others. This is a call to humility. One cannot go into charitable work, cannot attempt to walk with the poor with an attitude of supremacy or chivalry. We are not the great hope. We do not give out of a sense of guilt or superiority. We do what we can in the humility of Christ. We do what we can knowing that this is what we are called to do. For many of us, we are but a paycheck or two away ourselves from being the one who may be in need. We give and care out of solidarity with the one whom we are called to follow, Christ. Now, Henri Nouwen says that Jesus, the Blessed One, is poor. The poverty of Jesus is much more than the economic or social poverty. Jesus is poor because he freely chose powerlessness over power, vulnerability over defensiveness, dependency over self-sufficiency. As the great song of Christ so beautifully expresses, he did not count equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself, becoming as human beings are. This is the poverty of spirit that Jesus chose to live. A poverty of spirit as Jesus chose, a unique position that each one of us can work towards. This is much more than being human. It is a spiritual empathy, an understanding of the true human condition, and a realization that in each person there is a spirit that we are called to meet and greet, lift up, and make first in this world. That we who may be considered first become last, so those looked upon as last and least may be first. Joan Chichester, who's a Benedictine, says, in a world where the accumulation of goods, money, and power and property denies millions the basics of life, their wages, their resources, their education, their health, their future, Benedictine spirituality confronts that kind of engorgement with the principle of sufficiency. It is written, the rule says, distribution was made as each had need, and whoever needs us should thank God and not be disgusted, but whoever needs more should feel humbled because of their weakness. Benedictine spirituality simply confines us to what is necessary so that we can help to sustain those who cannot earn the money they need to take care of themselves. So for Joan, this is a spiritual practice in community, and yet easy enough to adopt in one's own life. It speaks of a practice of taking our needs, evaluating them, maybe even putting them on a hierarchical list, and starting at the bottom, start scratching them off. Just what is necessary? What is necessary for each of us that may be something different? In all humility, only each one of us can decide what that means for us. What is necessary? How much do we really need? This isn't about starving oneself. It isn't even about denying ourselves something fantastic or special now and then. It is about developing a spiritual practice of contemplation, evaluation, and action. Contemplation, spiritually looking at our lives, our position, and how we move through life as Christians. Evaluate, are there some things we can live without? Are there a better practice we can engage in and around money, food, conservation? What would happen if we changed our eating or shopping habits? Finally, Richard Rohr reflects, how blessed or happy are the poor in spirit. The kingdom of heavens is theirs. Poor in spirit means an inner emptiness and humility, a beginner's mind. Beginner's mind. Another way to put that is the mind of a child. And to live without a need for personal righteousness or reputation. It is the powerlessness of Alcoholics Anonymous' first step. The Greek word Matthew uses for poor is tutukya, which literally means the very empty ones, those who are crouching. They are bent over beggars, the little nobodies of this world, who have nothing left, who aren't self-preoccupied or full of themselves in any way. Jesus is saying, happy are you. You're the freest of all. Our prayers must be just as each one of these sayings are reflected. Just as Richard reflects, Lord, make me as the very empty ones. Help me to get out of the way. Let my ego go. Let your work within me begin. Let me evaluate how I can make my life simpler to the benefit of our brothers and sisters. Help me to seek you first and foremost, so that I may begin to build a just world for all. Amen.